All right, good morning, everyone. Thank you well, I guess now it's technically afternoon, so good afternoon, everyone. Welcome. We are so excited that you're joining us here today for the last of our Holocaust Survivor series for 2021. In my own words, this is an opportunity for us to bring our community together to connect with Holocaust survivors and their family members to share their personal testimonies and their stories. This is history that we definitely cannot forget, and it's history that we don't want to see repeated. But there are so many lessons that we can learn from these important stories and from these personal testimonies. And today we're so honored to partner with the Jewish Family and Children's Services Holocaust Center and the William J. Lowenberg Speakers Bureau to host our featured speaker today, Mr. Leon. But first, a couple of quick housekeeping rules. This meeting is being recorded. It is also being streamed on Facebook. So if you have any connectivity issues, you are welcome to hop onto Facebook and watch it there. The meeting will be recorded. Again, as I mentioned, it will be available to watch on demand on the Holocaust Center's website, which we'll put that link in the chat for you. A few things, if you'll stay on mute, we would appreciate that so that we can hear Leon, who will be highlighted on your screen in just a moment. This program should conclude right around 1 p.m. If you have any questions at all throughout today's program, please use the chat function and type your questions in, and then we will have those moderated at the end of Leon's presentation. But without further ado, I'd like to introduce Penny. Penny is the Education and Marketing Manager at the Jewish Family and Children's Services, and she is going to introduce our special guest today. So Penny, I will spotlight you and let you take it away with our program today.
Great, thank you so much, Lauren. Really quickly, I want to thank Kathy and Leilani and Stephen and the team at the Holocaust Center in Florida, and definitely Deborah Goldman for making this connection months ago. We're really happy to be here with you all today from the opposite side of the country. So really quickly, the Holocaust Center at JFCS, our history goes back to the late 1970s. We joined Jewish Family and Children's Services in 2010. And we started as a protest against a Nazi bookstore in the Sunset District of San Francisco. This brought the community of Holocaust survivors that had been living in the Bay Area to the forefront and to social and political recognition. And that protest led to the establishment of three things: a Holocaust library, which you see behind me is our Tauber Library and Archives, a Holocaust Memorial, which is at the Legion of Honor in San Francisco, and an annual Holocaust Remembrance Day in San Francisco, which we will be recognizing at the end of April, Yom HaShoah. And so Leon is a member of our Speakers Bureau, which is one of many programs that we offer. And our Speakers Bureau is the group of Holocaust and genocide survivors and their descendants who, before March 2020, used to go physically into classrooms and share testimony with students. And since March 2020, have been sharing testimony on Zoom and other online platforms with people all over the globe. And so it's been a really nice opportunity for Leon, who made a goal early on in the pandemic to speak in all 50 states. So we're really happy to be here crossing Florida off of his list. Since March 2020, he's shared testimony with over 5,000 individuals. He's spoken with students. He's spoken with employees at various companies in the Bay Area, with employees at Apple and Google, and now he's with you all in Florida. He's a treasured educator in our community. And I'll just really quickly, before I pass it to him, I'll read one of the many thank you notes that students send in after hearing his testimony. And the student wrote, "Dear Leon, thank you so much for sharing your story with me. I find it incredible and extremely inspiring that you maintained your hope, your faith, and your optimism despite your experiences. I feel blessed to be a member of the last generation who will hear your story directly from you. I promise that I will do everything I can to keep your story alive and work towards the complete elimination of hatred and bigotry." With that, Leon, I'll pass the mic to you.
Hi, again, I want to thank Deborah Goldman, Catherine, and Lauren for having me, inviting me, and thank you, Penny, very much for all your work. I'm Leon Reininger. I was born in Romania, state of Bukovina, city of Czernowitz, March 21st, 19 1931. I'm 90 years old. Czernowitz was famously described as a city where human beings and books used to live. Our grandparents, aunts, and uncles called it Little Vienna. It was part of the Habsburg Empire with a policy of tolerance. In the Habsburg Empire, people of different origins and cultures did manage to live together and at times even enjoyed one another's difference. It was a wonderful life under the Habsburg Empire. I arrived in the United States and in San Francisco in 1951. And after being 2 weeks, I decided to look for a soccer club. I played soccer from the time I started walking. And believe it or not, I get up every Saturday and Sunday at 3 o'clock to watch the British League live. I found the Accor Soccer Club had a dinner dance. There, I met Eva. We danced all night. She invited me to next day to a family picnic. I met her entire family, including her maternal grandmother. That was in 1951. This picture that you see, our wedding day, was 1961. We just celebrated our 60th wedding anniversary. About Romania. In 1930, there were 757,000 Jewish people in Romania. That was the third largest Jewish community in Europe. Not until 1923, the Jews in Romania win legal rights. Between 1923 and 1938 was considered the golden age of human rights. All the other times, we were stateless, we were foreigners, we had no rights. Queen Mother of Romania, she was part Scandinavian and part Greek. She married King Carl II of Romania, and they had one son called Michael. And Michael happened to be King of Romania in 1941. She called her son and said, if you don't stop persecuting the Jewish people, I will leave Romania, I'll never come back. For her effort to save as many Jewish people as possible after the war, she received the highest honor, the righteous among the nation. Traian Popovici was an attorney by profession, but he happened to be mayor of Czernowitz in 1941. He asked the central government in Bucharest if he can have 200 Jewish people to help him administer the city. Well, it turned out this gentleman saved 20,000 people. I wasn't one of them, but this man was demoted. He was threatened with his life. He was threatened they're going to kill his whole family. He prevailed, and after the war, he was also given the righteous among the nations. There were individuals that saved Jewish people, risking their life and the life of their families. There was a country in particular, and which its citizens, its parliament, and King Boris III came together in Bulgaria. When Germany demanded the Bulgarian Jews, Bulgaria answered, we have no Jews, we have only Bulgarians. By their acts, the righteous among the nation saved not only the Jewish lives, but the honor of humanity as well. Dmitry Peshchev passed away in 1973. My maternal grandfather, for my 8th birthday in 1939, took me to a play. It was called papierne Kinder, or paper children. As the curtain parted, there was an old, unkept man standing next to a small table with one serving of bread, no doubt the last until his next pension check. There was a small cot, a small chest of drawers, and 5 larger than life posters of his children who all emigrated to America. They all lived in New York, and they all were very successful, and he was very proud of them, except they have forgotten their father. I remember watching the audience, and I saw so many people, their handkerchief wiping their eyes, except my grandfather. At the end of the play, my grandfather and I walked side by side home, and he said to me, "You see, Leon, I have 9 children. Out of my 9 children, your mother was the only one that helped me, that takes care of me. And I want you to do the same for your parents, what your mother is doing for me." And we looked at each other, and I made him that promise. My grandfather must have seen the dark clouds on the horizon, because in June of the same year, he passed away. And I remember standing at his graveside for the longest time. My parents were almost outside of the gate of the cemetery. And I kept my promise. When I speak to students, I ask them to make the same promise that I made. And believe it or not, I get many notes and letters. "Yes, Leon, we're going to keep that promise." In the closing month of 1939, Hitler's Germany attacked Poland. That's when the Second World War began. I was 8 years old. That's the last time I could go to school. So in 1939, many refugees came across the border, like you see today on television, came across the border seeking food. My mother went every morning to the farmer's market, bought ingredients. She cooked the biggest pots of soup, and she ladled out as many lunches as she could. In 1940, Bukovina and Bessarabia was occupied by the Soviet Union. Our world changed overnight. The very next day, we had to stay in line for loaf of bread. Never in Romania did we have to stay in line for bread. And so we got in line. I always went along with my mother at 3:30 a.m. And by 6 o'clock, the government-controlled bakery opened up. After they sold 20, 30 loaves, they came out and said, "No more bread, come back tomorrow." And that sometimes took 3 days to stay in line to buy 1 loaf of bread per family. That was the Soviet Union. In 1941, in July of 1941, Hitler's Germany occupied Bukovina, Bessarabia. We had every day the Nazi killing squad killed between 70 to 100 men and women every day from mid-July to mid-September. My father was going to work, and while I was playing outside of the building, soccer, and I caught sight of my father, and I joined him. He got caught going to work, and now we were marching down the Prut River to the Prut River, which was about 7 kilometers. The German soldiers wanted me to leave, but I insisted I'm going to stay with my father, and I did. And when we got down to the Prut River, the bridge was partially destroyed. So my father and other men had to carry logs as big as telephone poles to support the bridge. I was there with him all the time, trying to help him. It was very lucky because most of the time, at the end of the day, they lined up the detail and they executed them. We were the only ones, I think, to come home that night. At midnight, we came home. And when we came home, my mother's face was completely swollen. She thought for sure we were executed. But we were lucky to come home. That's the first miracle. I have many miracles. Then in September, mid-September, the order was given that we have to evacuate our homes and move into a ghetto. And it so happened whether the ghetto was designated, my aunt, my mother's sister, with the family lived there in a 2-room apartment. And so we moved in with her, and another sister moved in with her family. So now there were the 3 sisters, 3 husbands, and us cousins. We were a total of 10. The order was given that we will not get any nourishment for our journey to Transnistria. And so we had to provide our own nourishment. So the ladies started from sheets to make for each of us a bag with a string, so we can keep a watchful eye on our food at all times. And they baked bread and they cut it up and they each filled each sack full, so we have food for the journey. Then we were herded out of our houses and we stayed all day, and then we marched down to the train station where the death cars were waiting for us. Can we get the next slide, please? And this we are herded out of our homes, our dwellings, and marching down to the train station. There, when we got to the train station, they counted 80 heads per car, and it didn't matter if children were separated from their parents or whatever happened. But first, I want to read you before we continue. I want to read you from my book, Black Days and Nights. I want to read you about my best friend, Marcel. I had a close friend named Marcel when I was a young boy. He was my best friend. We were the same age, went to the same school, lived in the same apartment building, and we both loved soccer. Each day after school, we would eat lunch in my family's apartment or his, and then we would kick the soccer ball outside until it was too dark to see the ball or our feet. But there was one way Marcel and I were different. I was Jewish, he was Catholic. Then one day in September of 1941, there came the order all Jews to leave their homes and be transported into a ghetto. There was no community outcry like today. There was no community protest like today. And we left in silence. So after we were packed into the boxcars, it was sealed, and now we had to, most of the young people were standing against the wall of the boxcar. There was no room to sit. I will read you now what happened in the boxcar after it was sealed. We had to start rationing our dry bread supply immediately, not knowing how long we were going to be locked up in the boxcars. We also had to ration our water supply using only a limited amount of drinking. One corner of the boxcar was chosen for personal needs. It was divided by a blanket for privacy. There were people of all ages in our boxcar, from the newborns to the very elderly. Despair was pervasive. People were ready to give up on life. We had lost all shame and self-esteem. Everything anyone had done or been in the past was erased. Many people contemplated suicide. Some chose to die at their own hands. It took us 4 days to cross Bukovina and Basarabia. Our train stopped along the banks of the Dniester River. The cattle cars were opened. Before us stood a line of Romanian guards, each with his rifle and bayonet pointing straight at us. It was a long jump down from the boxcar. People were weak. Many were separated from their families. There was panic in the air. Children yelled for their fathers and mothers. Everyone tried to find a family member or a friend. One mother placed, I saw it with my own eyes, she placed her baby in the bushes, hoping a farmer will save the baby. This I'm showing on the map how we were transported to Transnistria and also the death marches. My favorite uncle in Europe, who was employed driving a two-horse carriage, and sometimes he came by and gave me a ride, let me hold the whip. Of course, I was too fond of horses to ever use them, but I enjoy being with my Uncle Shaya. And so my uncle happened to be on a death march. With his family, by the 1941, he had a 4-year-old daughter, 3-year-old son, and his wife, and they marched. He held the kids by their hands, and he kept carried his belongings and the children's, and they marched for the longest time. Then the children got so tired they couldn't walk no longer. So what he did is gave all these things to my aunt, and he picked up both children in his arms and carried them and marched, continued marching until he collapsed and the children fell on top of him. The Romanian soldier wanted to shoot the children first. My uncle insisted that he wants to be shot first. And my aunt, after the war, and this is the documents that I found in Yad Vashem that she made out. In 1956, June 5th, that's when the documents were made out, what happened to her family. When we got there, she was gone. She died at the young age of a broken heart. She couldn't live without her family. So that's all I have from my uncle and family, Shaya. This I'm showing to show you what happened, what can happen to a human being. And in 4 days and nights. So you see on the left, this gentleman is boarding the train, and then you see the same man 4 days later. Now, after the war, there were many questions asked, and I heard as late as 2000. Why didn't you resist? Why didn't you fight? Well, you can see this man, is he ready to fight? No, we were families with small children, with grandparents. We had no military training. We had no military leadership. We had no weapons, no food, and no hope. There was not a single world leader or country to help us. We were all alone. We did the best we could. And the way you see the man look, that's how I looked. Once we arrived in Atashi, Basarabia, that was the last station in Romania. We crossed the Dniester River. The Holocaust Romania culminated cruel deportation under murderous condition. The evil reigned between the Buk and the Dniester, the two great rivers in Ukraine. While there was no gas chambers in Transnistria, everything else was in place. We lost 400,000 Jewish people in Transnistria through many causes, through many ways. The fires, the death marches, the starvation, and the plague. And so now we were crossing the Dniester River, and we stayed in the assembly room all night standing. The very next day, they were marching us to a concentration camp called Mogilov-Podolsk concentration camp. Very few people survived it. Well, while we were marching, there was a Ukrainian young man with a two-wheel cart going the same direction we are going. My mother asked the soldier if we could put our things on it. He said yes, and so we did. Meanwhile, the cart got heavy, too hard to pull. This is another miracle. So we had only one soldier guarding us. While the Ukrainian Jewish people from Mogilov-Podolsk were calling to us, telling Jeden geht's nicht rein in Lager. Jews don't go into the camp, you'll die there, which was all true. And so my mother took out some money, gave the soldier 500 lev as a bribe, and he looked the other way, and we grabbed our things and escaped. And we must have been the only one that escaped, but we escaped. And finally, a Jewish family, let us in their house, and now we stayed in that house. The only thing, we had no food. We used all the food up in the boxcar. So I and my cousin went out. There was a farmer's market right across. It was very easy to get to. And so we went and we tried to trade needles, pins, whatever we could for some food. And we begged. And so every day we came home with some food to support 10 people. But my mother and her two sisters felt we're going to get caught, all of us, and we have to do something. Well, if you want to hear the craziest thing, but true, they decided they're going to go to the German headquarters to ask for mercy. Well, this was all Romanian territory, Transnistria, but there was a German headquarters. And as they went there, my mother spoke fluent German, and a captain came out of the building with a cane, an older officer, and my mother approached him with her two sisters, and she asked him, please, can you help us? We have small children. We want to live through this war. Well, he said, here in Mogilov-Podolsk, for sure, you will die. But I will send you to a small ghetto. There's a sugar factory. You'll be able to work there. You'll be able to survive. He didn't know it was bombed out. But anyway, he said, come back with your family tomorrow morning at 5 a.m. and I will have a truck for you. Well, but he said, I have something to ask of you. I have two young sons fighting in Stalingrad. Pray for my sons so I can see them one more time before I die. And I will send you to a place where you will live. Well, the three ladies came home. They talked with their husbands all night. What shall we do? Can we trust the German officer? They decided that's the only alternative they have. And at 5 a.m., even though it was curfew, you're not supposed to be out by 8. 5 a.m., we got out of the house. As soon as we left the house, it started to snow so heavily that maybe that was manna from heaven because it gave us good cover. But we went from doorway to doorway to doorway, trying to hide in between because it was curfew. You're not supposed to be out. And so we got to the headquarters. There was a fence, and we all laid down, the 10 of us, and waited for Captain Heitzman to come out at 5. And at 5 a.m. exactly, he came out, and a truck moved up just like you see it here on the screen. And he said, get on the truck, you'll be saved. And so it was. We landed in a small ghetto called Jurin. There was 5,000 people in the ghetto, and And it was given once a day. You got some soup. It was basically hot water, but that's what it was. So when we got to Jureen, after 3 weeks, my mother and one of her sisters found a hut, and that's where we stayed. But my aunt passed away 3 weeks later. It was a big shock to us. My mother never recovered from it because she felt her sister dying so young. But that's how it was. And so here you see, this is exactly the way it was there. You see it now like a photograph. You see, we found some boards and we found some bricks, and we made a bed. And my father never went to bed. He hated lice and he couldn't stand lice. And we were completely full of lice. And so he loused himself 24 hours. He never went to bed. But during the day, I would be sitting in the middle, my mother on the right, and we waited for nightfall, because if you laid in bed 24 hours, got swollen, you died. So we had to stay upright, and every few hours we would open the door, it was all snowed in, and scoop up a little snow and let it melt, and then each of us had a sip of water. We had no food in January, month of January, and half of February, we had no food. That's all we lived on, is the water from the snow. And so when nightfall came, we were very happy because we could go to sleep. And so, but we could not go to get soup because first we had only one container, 3 by 6 inch container. And second, it was too far to walk. We were too weak to walk to get the soup. And so that's all we had, is that water. Next, please. When spring and summer came, of course, it was much easier to survive. We were going through the cornfields, not to be seen, and then we got to the farmers and we begged and we traded whatever we had left. We didn't have much left, but most of it we begged. And I went into the woods. I went through the cemetery. I'm the only one that knows where my aunt was buried. And then into the forest. And there I took mostly what was on the floor. And basically, pine cones was very good because they burn fast and very strong, very good. And they're light to carry. I couldn't carry much because I was too weak, but I carried as much as I could. And so I had to go very often into the forest. But one time I traded a bundle of wood for a sack and opened up the sack and made a makeshift net. And then there was a river coming through the ghetto. And so I went fishing. I had no bait, but I let the sack down. And then every 15, 20 minutes, I lifted up the sack. And sometimes I would find about 2-3 inch fish, 2 to 3 fish. By the end of the day, I would have a small can full of fish. That was the only protein I had in 3 years. But also I kept clean. That was the biggest blessing of them all, that I kept clean in the summer. The order came from German headquarters that they need men for the Book River to work on the Book bridge. And so when I heard that, what I did is in the back of the hut, it was all stucco. So between the 2 walls, the brick in front and the stucco in the back, there was a room. What I did is pulled out a piece of stucco and hid my father and 4 other young men. And I closed it up. Nobody would ever know that that people are there, except the neighbor saw me, what I was doing. And when he saw that they came to take him, he pointed the finger to the back of that wall. And of course, they got out all the men, including my father. And when they came around, it was about midnight. It was a very dark night. When they came around to the front of our hut, my mother saw my father and she pulled him in and shut the door, not seeing that behind my father was a Romanian soldier. And we were blind because of malnutrition at night, especially. And so the Romanian soldier busted in and threw my mother to the floor. There was a large kitchen knife on the table. I was afraid he's going to shoot my mother. It was the worst moment in my life, but I grabbed the knife and I was behind the soldier. He swung the rifle over his shoulder. I went back and dropped the knife on the table, and he took my father away. Again, I have to tell you another miracle, because 3 weeks later, my father came back. They had too many men. We'll keep him for next time. And so that's how unbelievable. It happened only once that people came back there alive. In 1942, my mother came down with typhus, and we took her to the hospital. There were many people, all of them were there with typhus. The adults, usually 9 out of 10 died of typhus. My mother was very weak, and I know that she needed some extra nourishment in order to survive. It was midwinter. It was very snowed in and midwinter. I decided that I will go and get a chicken for my mother. We had a Ukrainian farm lady, a wonderful woman. She always helped us. She always gave us no matter what. And so I thought I go to her and beg her to give me a chicken for my mother. She loved my mother. And so that's what I did. One day, about early morning, I decided to go. It was about 5 kilometers away. But once I stepped out from the ghetto into the village, I had to go to the main road because it was 3 feet of snow. And so I decided to go there, and I struggled very hard because by that time I had no shoes. I had rags on my feet. And so it was hard to put one foot down and bring the other foot forward. Well, the first farmer saw me through the window, and he came out and hollered to me, "Young boy, you will never make it." I hollered back, "Yes, I will make it. I will." And I did. And when I got to Yevdocha and told her about my mother, she gave me a big bowl of borscht. And then she went out of the shed and got me a chicken. And that was the biggest treasure I could save my mother. And so I put it under my shirt, and I needed my hands and feet to get back because it continues to snow. When I got out on the road, I had no choice. I figured I can crawl, but I can't walk no longer. And so that's what I did. I crawled, I walked, I crawled, I walked. I finally came home. And when I came home, my father cooked a small piece of chicken and with some soup. And then I brought it down to the hospital. Nobody could go into the hospital because everybody had typhus. And so they took it by the door, and I went around. It was a 1-story building. I went around to see where my mother is, and there I watched her eat and did not leave until she finished, and I could get my little pot back. And so we did it for about 2 weeks. And then I came down with typhus. My father took me down to the hospital, and they felt that I have only hours left to live, because the young and the old, they died. There was no question. They all died. So without my father's knowledge, what they did is they put me in the morgue. They had no bed, and they put me, I was 11 and a half years old. They put me in a crib in the morgue, 3 feet from 3 windows, all without glass. The snow was coming in, but they felt I had only hours left to live. Well, when I was left there, I got into a coma, into unconsciousness, and I was 5 days unconscious. And on the 5th day, I opened my eyes. It was prepared to live. I opened my eyes, and I saw the 3 windows of glass. I have a chance if somebody passes by, and everybody had to pass by, I would give them a signal that I'm alive. And who passes by? My father going to my mother. In that moment, I had my eyes open, and I called to my dad, please, Daddy, help me. And he heard my cry, and he went to the nurse, and they checked me out, and they handed, he carried me all the way home. And when I got home, he gave me every 2 hours a sip of water, and because I was all dehydrated, and regained strength and became stronger and well. My mother recovered. In the fall, the farmers from the communal farm was obligated to give the produce to the German war effort. But before we continue with that, I want to tell you about when I speak to students at this point, I tell them that in my 90 years, I never lost control over my life. And I ask them, please never lose control over your life. Always stay in control. When I was in the morgue, those 5 days, I was not in control. So when they delivered to the train station, to the front, they delivered different produce, and I concentrated basically on sugar beets. They were very big, they're very nourishing. My mother made lots of food out of it, and it was very, very good. So I concentrated when they were hauling. The farmers didn't care because they'd given it away anyway. I was in the bushes. I put stones strategically on the dirt road. And when the wagon came by, it started to shake. Of course, beets were falling off. I ran out, grabbed the beets, put them in the bushes, waited till the next wagon came and the next soldier going by, and then I do it again and again and again until the end of the day. I had a sack full of sugar beets. That was like $1 million because it kept us alive all fall and winter. 3 weeks before liberation, we had no food in the house, and my mother said, we have to go and get some food. So my mother and I went into the village, and we crossed the main road. There, we got caught by a very vicious, he was Ukrainian, but attached to the Wehrmacht, and he started beating us. He killed many people that way. And he started beating us. I tried to get my mother underneath me, but we were both beaten pretty bad. And the farmers saw it through the windows. They all came out, maybe 30 people came out and looked at him and threatened him now with his life. So he told us, next time I catch you, I shoot you. And he meant it. He killed very many people, but he let us go, and we recovered, and we got some food. 3 weeks later, we were liberated by the partisans and then the Russian army. First man that hung in the middle of the town was that soldier, that Ukrainian vicious soldier. He was the first one to hang. My other aunt came and said, let's go home. And so we decided we're going to walk home. It took us 9 days. And those 9 days, my mother and her sisters, all they talked about, they're going to open a deli. Well, it sounded wonderful. Food sounded so good. And so that's all they talked and planned about. And my aunt had some rubles to buy a knife, to buy some salami and some bread, and they're going to look for an empty store, and they're going to make a deli. And they did. And it was very, very, very successful. And so once we came back, we stayed again with my aunt's family, and we stayed there for about 2 weeks to rest up for the 9-day journey. And my father went out to look for friends and for family. And now he got caught by the Russians. The Russians blocked off streets. And what happened is they caught all the men and the women to ship to Siberia for work and for interrogation and so forth. And now my father, after being just returned from hell, is going back to hell. And so I marched again with my father, going down to the train station and to the main train station. And there, my father needed to go to the bathroom. And I asked a Russian soldier, can my father go into the bathroom? He said, yes. And so he did. When we got into the station, there was 3-4 stalls. And I said to him, you stay there. I'll give you a sign if they're looking for you, if they remember that you're missing. Otherwise, stay there. And after the train leaves, you go home. It was very easy. I would have done it. But no, my father said, no, I can't. They need me, whatever. I have to go. And so he did. He got on the train, and I ran after the train for the longest time. I was sure I'll never see him again. But 9 months later, we received a letter that he survived all the interrogation, and he's now in the fire department in the army. So I said to my mother, we want to go back to our condominium where we lived before the war. And so the next day we packed up. We had nothing to pack that much, but we went to our condominium. When we got to our condominium, my mother knocked on the door, and there was a crippled Christian lady came out by the name of Sophie, and she had a beautiful Pekingese dog named Fifi. And my mother told Sophie, this is our condo. We bought it in 1930, and we like to come back. Well, Sophie said she's going to move. Well, my mother said, no, no, no. And I called her, I love that you stay. And so she did. Sophie was very happy. She didn't have the money, the strength, the apartment. She could not move. And Fifi was even happier because my mother would come home every night with ends of the salami, and Fifi loved the salami. We lived on the 3rd floor, and he got so fat from the salami, he rolled down the stairs. Sometimes he was getting to the salami. Anyway, they were both very happy, and now we lived there. My mother gave Sophie every morning money to shop for us, and she felt that we have to be like one family, and we were. And And 9 months later, we got another letter from my father, and then finally he got a furlough for a month to come to Czernowitz to visit his wife and his son. And when he came back, the first thing we did is plan our escape, because that was the best time to escape the Soviet Union. Well, when we planned, my father came back on a Monday, and on Sunday we were going to escape Sunday morning. And so my mother went every day on the farmer's market and bought all kinds of rice and flour and potatoes and everything, and a lot of cans of tuna and meats, and so Sophie wouldn't have to go begging for a long time. She left us some money, and so Sophie was the only one that knew that we're going to escape, and so we did. And Sunday morning at 5 a.m. we escaped to Poland, and from there we went to Austria with a train, and from Austria to Germany. And in Germany we were stopped and put in displaced-person camps. Our first camp was Holocaust, and that was in Hessen, Germany. Our second camp was Kassel, and that was also in Hessen, Germany. Third camp was Landsberg am Lech, that was Bavaria, West Germany. And our fourth camp was Lager Lechfeld, and that was also in Bavaria, West Germany. In 1951, we received permission to sail to the United States. But before that, I want to read you what happened to my best friend, Marcel, in Czernowitz. When my family returned to Czernowitz in March of 1944, we walked into our old and mostly vacant apartment building. I was reluctant to see my childhood friend, Marcel. Before deportation, we were the same in so many ways and different in one way that didn't seem to matter much. Now the difference made all the difference. He was Catholic, I was Jewish. He would be a thriving young teenager, healthy and strong. I was sickly and thin. Malnutrition had stunned my growth. I didn't want him to see me like this. Strangely, after being so strong to withstand and overcome such great hardship, I felt embarrassed. But there were only 18 apartments in our building. 14 were previously occupied by Jewish families. We were the only ones to return. If Marcel still lived in the building, we would surely meet again. And one day we did. We passed each other in the stairwell. He lived on the first floor. I lived on the third floor. He was going up. I was going down. We stopped for a moment and stared at each other. He must have been struck by my appearance. I could not speak, and he remained silent. Silent as so many had remained during those horrible years of the Holocaust. We never saw each other again because I think we both tried to avoid each other. And so we never saw each other again. So in 1951, we sailed in February to the United States, our happiest day. It was 5 a.m. when we arrived and passed the Statue of Liberty. It was an extraordinary day. We were 4,000 souls on board General Bridgeford. We stood still, we were speechless and almost breathless. It took an eternity before this moment arrived. It was February 28, 1951, 3 weeks before my 20th birthday. That's the day I felt I was born. After a train trip to San Francisco, I also arrived in the United States after being 11 years in camps and in ghettos. So I had a second grade of education. When I speak to students, I ask them, please try to get as much education as you can. I promise you, your life will be better. So I worked in a steel factory for a year and a half, and then I enrolled at City College. I happened to have good grades. I was the third from the draft. But then President came on the air and asked for volunteers. The very next day, I volunteered for the United States Army to honor the country, which gave me freedom and a new life. And here I'm showing I'm serving in Korea. I'm a designated Korean War veteran, and I'm very proud of my service. These are the family members that perished, including my uncle and his two children. There were about 21 members that perished. A couple of years ago, I wrote an ethical will. And in the ethical will, I spoke about my favorite uncle, Shaya. Well, when my granddaughter, who was expecting her second son, came from Los Angeles to visit us and our parents, I gave her one of the copies, and she stayed the longest time on the page that talked about my uncle Shaya. Well, I was invited at Google headquarters in Mountain View, and there I received the call from my granddaughter that her second son was named Shaya. And here is Shaya at 1 year old. He's now 2 years old. In conclusion, I hope and pray that you and future generations should never have to experience such violence that I had. Can you imagine my story and all other Holocaust survivor stories being the final stories of hate and violence ever to be told? Can you imagine each of us doing our part to make the world a better place for all? Can you imagine the peace that could come to our world if all people of the world let go of old grievances and instead love thy neighbor? If all could let go of centuries of old racial and religious differences. This is why we must ensure the lessons of the Holocaust, humanity's greatest crime ever, and all the other genocide taught today and to future generations. I sincerely hope that you will pass this on to your future children and down the line. As we Holocaust survivor pass on, we rely on you to make sure never to forget. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to be with you.
Thank you so much, Leon. Thank you, everyone. We totally understand that it's 1 o'clock and if you have to drop off, that's fine. But I am going to ask Leon just a couple questions. Leon, when you came to the United States, did you or your family members talk about your experiences in Europe?
No, we never did. We never did. And the reason was, I don't know the reason, but I know that it was not a family conversation. We talked about today and about the future, but we never want to visit the past. And not until 2000, when there was this British professor, Mr. Irving, that denied the Holocaust, that I wrote a family book for my children so they know what happened. Before that, 2000, I never talked to anybody about it. And my parents passed away, and we never ever mentioned Europe or the past. We only talked about the future.
Did your family keep any Jewish traditions during the Holocaust?
Yes, my mother was the only one in the family. There were 9 children, and she was the only one in the family. They were all secular, and that she kept Shabbat. And she happened to be married at 16 because her mother died when she was 9 years old, and so she had no home. And so she had to get married when she was 16, and kept a Jewish home till the very last day of her life. She was very religious to the very end.
Have you experienced anti-Semitism in the United States?
Well, there was in the army, but not, I didn't experience, but others did. But I did not. But things, when we arrived, was very, very good, I think. We were most happy to be in San Francisco. But since then, things have changed. Of course, there are a lot of changes, but we did not really experience anti-Semitism.
Well, thanks, Leon, and thanks everybody for sticking on a little longer. Leon, do you have any final words for us before we say goodbye?
Thank you so much for having me. Thank you for inviting me, and see you soon again.
Thank you, Leon. We've got some nice notes in the chat for you. I'll make sure that you get them. If anybody else would like to send Leon a note, I will put the email address to which you could send something you want to reflect and write to him, or you have some questions for him, that's fine. I'm putting also in the chat a link to a short survey and a link to our website. I ask that you maybe pick one person in your life that didn't hear Leon's testimony today that you could share it with, so we can keep growing the number of people who have heard survivor testimony. I know many of you are probably returning to programs time and time again, but I think part of what Leon's asking us to do is take his story out into the world beyond our communities as far as we can. And thanks so much. I'll pass it back to you, Lauren. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Leon. Again, it was truly remarkable to hear you and your family's story of survival. And as Penny said, that is why we do this work. It is to ensure that these stories are heard. And as our survivor population does continue to age, we want to make sure that those stories are captured, both in written testimony and visual testimony. And we're just so grateful to have this partnership. So thank you, Penny. Thank you again, Leon, for your courage and commitment to sharing your testimony. And as Penny said, please share these videos. The link to the recording is in the chat. And encourage others to take a moment and listen. There's so many great lessons that we learn from one another, from our history, and that we can then share with our children and future generations. Here at the Holocaust Center in Maitland, Florida, we're so grateful for your continued support and ongoing support. Love to see so many people that join us regularly for these programs. We appreciate your financial support during this time of giving. We hope that you'll keep us in your plans to support this holiday season. We wish you all the best. Our next program will be in person at the Holocaust Center here in Maitland but you'll also be able to join us via a live stream. That will be for International Holocaust Remembrance Day on January 27th in the new year. We're honored that Holocaust survivor Abe Pazam will be sharing his story for the very first time outside of his family. So we hope that you'll get that information from our website and plan to join us. And again, thank you so much for your support of our Holocaust Center and the Holocaust centers across the country. And Leon, again, we just wish you well. Congratulations on your recent anniversary. Love to see that. Wish you and your bride well. Penny, thanks again. And to everyone, have a fantastic day and a wonderful holiday season and a very happy new year. Thank you so much for joining us today.